Alright, now I'm going to start working on the transmission, and what I need to do to it is to eliminate the differential. So right now, if you rotate the wheel one way, the other wheel is going to go the other way. Now that's actually hitting that other wheel, so it's hard to see. Alright, so if I rotate this one this way, that one goes the other way. And the reason it does that is so that when you're mowing the lawn and everything, it doesn't grab on both sides equally. So if you turn a corner, the distance on the outside of that corner is going to be farther than the inside. So the inside wheel would travel less and actually have to spin a little bit if they were fixed one rotation on each side, and that would dig up your grass. You don't really want that. But in this application, if I put a load on this wheel to turn a pulley with a belt, well, all that'll happen is it'll transfer the power to this wheel, and that wheel will spin, and that one will just sit there. And that's why, lawn tractors get stuck pretty easy in various things, because they are limited slip, or not limited slip, unlimited slip. That differential just lets the one wheel that's not grabbing as much just turn as much as it wants to, and you just be able to. And a lot of vehicles are that way too, actually most of them, so that when they go around a corner they don't squeal the tires, because that inside wheel has to turn farther than it's actually going. But I took all the bolts out of here, and now I'm just going to take the cover off. I still got a couple bolts holding it in there. I've actually never welded a differential so it doesn't turn, so this will be my first time for that. The other thing I did was I took the shifter off, because I didn't want it down digging into the dirt. When I turn it upside down, I think I want to flip it completely 180 degrees so you can shift it up here, kind of sticking out like a tail from the end of this thing rather than being in the dirt or cutting it off or whatever. I think that's probably going to be sufficient just to turn that upside down and then put it back together and put it in there. But some more pictures on that as we go along. Alright, I want to get that spider gear off this half shaft, and in order to do that, a lot of them have like different kind of keepers on the top to keep it in place. This one is an older one, and you can see it has this little, overlapping spiral based keeper in there that you kind of just have to dig out with a knife and get it to come up out of that groove down in the bottom. So that's what I'm working on, is working that thing out of there. Then I'll be able to get the spider gear off that so I can start locking up the transmission. Alright, I'm going to make a separate video just about doing the transmission on this thing because it is an application that's been done in lots of different ways, and I have not done it before, but after watching all the different ways that people did it, I thought, it could be better. And one of the things I thought of doing was just taking all those, what they call spider gears, off. And so I just have the two shafts in there, and then just where they meet up, just weld everything right together, right in there, welds all the way around there. And that could work pretty good, I think, but it's not going to be necessarily as strong because you don't have as much bearing surface just on that. So I thought, well, what else can I do with the stuff that I have? And of course I always like to reuse things I have around, like this seat spring I've been using for all kinds of things. And I thought if I took some of these nipples I could make an apparatus that would slide onto that shaft and then provide a hub using these blocks of steel for a spline. Now I think of all these different nipples I've got, I think I want to use this, actually, this coupler, because the coupler will accept the shaft inside of it, and then once I get that shaft lined up, I can use it to weld it in any position I need it in. And this, it's kind of interesting because this this gear doesn't run the spider gears in the middle. It kind of goes off to one side. I don't know if you can see that from the old grease path in there. So it's kind of more, you know, more on that side of things when it actually runs. So if I put these pieces of metal in there, they can go in like that, and then they'll be able to slide back and forth and still produce that turning motion that's transferred to that hub when I weld that all together. So I think the first thing I want to do, other than getting things cut out, is set up a fixture so that I can weld these tangentially to that coupler. Let's see, I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. Either set it like this and use some kind of material to hold that steady or whatever. But I want to get that tacked on and see if I can't get that welded up. And I'm trying to use just the most basic tools. I don't have any machine shop around or anything like that that I can just do whatever I want to. So this is going to be a low-cost, low-tech solution using just a welder, a grinder, and a little cutoff wheel, angle grinder with a cutoff wheel in it. So let's see if I can't build a fixture and get these things welded up. I may soon find out why I've never seen wet sand used this way before, but I've got that sort of built up into the shape I want it so that I can attempt to get this welded up, and we'll see if wet sand makes a good fixture for those who don't have a machine shop. Well, there it is. The sand held up okay and did a reasonable job of keeping the thing in place, but I would have to call that carpentry quality, not machinist quality. It does kind of tail off a little bit to one side, and I thought, you know, how can you go too far wrong making a tangent with just one point? I didn't have to be directly opposing another angle or anything like that. I may try to bend that a little bit. I'm not sure if my weld is going to be brittle or not, but I'm going to try to well, maybe I'll get the other piece of metal out and see if it seems like it'll be okay to me. Well, I've laid that up there so it's sort of, I've got a plane of reference with that piece of metal so that it roughly bisects the circle and is relatively straight across. So I'm going to put that solidly in my, well, that might work category. Alright, now that shaft represents the finished length, and I purposely made them long so that I could adjust the length of it to specifically fit into the slot provided. and I'm going to cut those off and then grind them until they fit into that sprocket with just about the same clearance as it had before. That's my goal anyway. Well, I sort of unintentionally cut it off pretty precisely the same size as that other thing, so it does have a little bit of end play and of course some side play because it's not as thick as that other thing. So my plan was to add a piece of metal like that to stabilize it against this side, and it's kind of short for that. I also thought about putting it this way and kind of putting it in the middle and just having like a little tab halfway and welding that up. I still think that's a pretty good idea since it transfers a lot of the force and stabilizes that inner web, so if it's not straight up and down it will still carry the load relatively well. And I think that end play, I think I'll leave that just about as is. But as you get smaller and smaller with these pieces, cutting them is going to become harder and harder, or hotter and hotter as it goes, because I suppose I could put it in the vise. That might help to get that, because I want to cut that on an angle to try to follow that curve. And I'll use one piece on this side, I flip it around and use the other piece on the other side, and then weld that into the middle. Alright, I finished up the welds. I put it back in and it's fitting in there pretty good. I just need to somehow get it all permanently affixed to the shaft, and on this side it sticks out a little more than the other side, but I want to get some way of doing that hopefully in the case without welding, and then potentially taking it out of the case and welding it. So what I might do is use some epoxy. I don't know if that's a good idea, bad idea or not, but there's threads and roughness, those little splines on there. So there's threads inside that coupling and splines on the outside of the shaft. It may or may not work, and if it has a failure, that's kind of where I'd like the failure point to be, is in that epoxy, so I can take it apart and put it back together. But I'm a little too fatigued, I guess. My patience is growing a little short, so I'm going to just take this and cover it up, save it for another day when I'm don't feel rushed. I can get back into it and, you know, give it some more treatment to try to get it all in there and together without messing it up. Alright, the short side of the shaft kind of wasn't any too long, and the long side was sort of plenty long, so my little locker is fine to weld that directly into that side of it. But on the other side, I think I'm going to use a little bit of a pipe nipple to extend it, and that will help center that inside there. Now I'll have to cut that down to pretty short. It doesn't have to be very long, maybe just a little longer than that, so maybe about half the size it is right now. But that will allow me to put that in, have this center it, and then, you know, everything should go right together firmly, so that even if I wanted to weld that together, I could weld all this up outside of the whole transmission thing itself. because I really don't want to weld inside the transmission and get steel splattered all over the aluminum or whatever else. I suppose I could put wet jeans down or tinfoil or something, but I want to get this welded outside the containment of the transmission, and hopefully that will have enough slop up and down, side to side, that any imperfections in the alignment on this side will be eliminated. And once I get that in, I'll be able to test it, the whole thing, with this just sitting there, to see how well that works out. Alright, I'm ready to button my thing back up, and I've got the short half of the shaft welded, but I don't know that I can do a precise enough job of welding on the other side to get everything to fit. And my load is going to be just on one side anyway, because I'm going to be using this to drive a buzz saw. It will be mounted upside down on the top of the chassis, so I'm switching the shifting lever to point the opposite direction. I'll secure that, and then I'll be using this epoxy fix-it stick to attach the other half of the shaft into there to keep everything stabilized. Certainly would have been better to just have a solid shaft, and I did have to grind some of that off to get it to fit in there. I'll fit that, epoxy it, and put the case together, make sure it runs around, but I've only got a certain amount of working time when this epoxy starts to kick over, so things are going to happen really fast once I get to this stage. This is like a putty. It's a two-part putty. You take it out, you need the two components of it together to kind of make a clay material, and then I'll stuff it in there. Of course I'll have to, clean all the grease off of that and everything, but that will be at least the end of this step. Now, to get the gear back on, I may have to machine off some of this locker piece that I made, so it will go in there, but I'll do that in a separate step once I get this shaft assembled in a fashion that's more or less workable. Then I'll put the gear on and then button everything back up again. I've got other projects I need to get to, as well as the beekeeping stuff that I need to get squared away for beekeeping season. I got my bees this morning and have them installed, but I got to get this thing out of the way so I can have room in my honey house to do more important work. Alright, there it is, all buttoned back up. I put most of the screws in. There's still a few over there I haven't got in, but I got it in, and it rotates. I guess you can't even see that rotating. It's a little sticky in some areas, and it's got a little play in it, so I don't know if that's going to be perfect or not. We'll see how it runs once I get it all together, and I kind of can't take it apart right now because it's it's got to set up. That stuff's supposed to wait 24 hours before you touch it, so we're waiting now. Alright, so the epoxy's set up, and now let's see what it looks like in there. Well, it's together, and I think it's hitting, kind of locking up there. Maybe if I slide it this way. Yeah. kind of gone off to the side there. But I may be able to remedy that and potentially even get a tack in there. But I'm going to try to get that gear on and see if it will work. Alright, I threw it in gear, twisted the drive gear around a few times, and watched the shaft turn. And there is no binding. I did one full rotation. There's no binding in there or anything. So I think it's going to be at least functional. Now I haven't got any of the belts set up on the mower thing yet, so I can't really test it in operation. But I think that's going to be it for the Mok Locker 0.2, and we'll wrap it and put it together, and subscribe, like, and etc.